Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. I've been having fun working the Irish mesh stitch on knitting looms. The first video I made was of doing it on a kiss loom, and it's a little bit different on other kinds of looms, so I'm here to show you what I found out so you can do it too. This is the Irish mesh stitch. Stitches pass through other stitches, leaving lace eyelets to get this. Down here you'll see where I tried some experiments that didn't quite come out right. I'll explain it to you later. It's not a failure exactly, it's just not what I want to do this time, but you may want to use it in the future. Here's how the Irish mesh stitch is achieved. Turns out that on a loom with normal pegs, Ewrap is the best stitch. I always slip peg number 1. That's optional, and it's going to depend what you're actually using it for. Ewrap peg number 2, but it is not going to be part of the pattern. Here is the actual pattern. 1, 2, 3 stitches. And we're going to knit off the first one that's just part of the edge and knit off all 3 of the Ewrap stitches. But the Ewrap on these stitches is just to create some room. So we slip the edge stitch. This stitch is not part of the pattern. These 3 stitches are the pattern stitches. We're going to take stitch 2 and move it to needle 1, allowing the Ewrap to untwist, and we're going to do the same with stitch 3. That stitch may tend to elongate, and we can shorten it up by pulling on the working yarn. Knit the lower stitch over the top 2. Now move the top remaining stitch back to needle 2. Peg 2, sorry. It doesn't want to go, but it's going to go. There it is. Now we wrap the empty peg 3, and we start again. Ewrap 3. Don't make this tight because it'll be difficult to work with if you do. Knit over 3. Take stitch 2, let it unwrap to make room to bring it over to needle 1, peg 1. Same with stitch 3. Shorten up stitch 3 if it grew. Knit the bottom over the top 2. Separate the top 2 so that you can lift the very top one back to peg 2 and wrap peg 3. 1, 2, 3. Knit all of the stitches. Move stitch 2 to peg 1 and stitch 3 to peg 1, allowing them to unwrap. Adjust the top stitch, knit the bottom stitch over, and move the top stitch to peg 2 and wrap. When we get to this point, we don't want the last stitches to be part of the pattern, so in this case we're knitting off 3 without including them in the pattern. They're just the end stitches. Now every return row is just knitting. In this case Ewraps, because I found that Ewraps do work the best on this kind of pegs. I'm going to slip the first stitch, meaning actually peg. Slip the first peg, meaning do not knit it, and Ewrap the remaining ones all the way across and knit them off. You know how to do that, so I'll meet you when I've done. The next row is almost identical to the first row, and all odd numbered rows are. All even numbered rows are just knitting back to the starting point. The only difference between this row and the last one is we'll slip this stitch as we did before, we'll knit this stitch, but we will also knit this stitch, and it won't be part of the pattern, which is going to offset the pattern from row to row. Now we will wrap the 3 that are pattern stitches. So these two just get knitted over and nothing else happens to them. These three get knitted over and included in the pattern. Stitch 2 goes to peg 1, untwisting, ditto for stitch 3, knit the bottom stitch over the top stitch, actually over the top 2 stitches, and move the top of the 2 remaining stitches to peg 2. Wrap the empty peg 3. 1, 2, 3, and these are part of the pattern. So we repeat. First knitting them all, now stitch 2 to peg 1, untwisting, stitch 3 to peg 1, untwisting, there it goes, adjust as needed, knit the bottom stitch over the other 2, move the top of the remaining 2 stitches to peg 2, wrap the empty peg 3. One more time, and this time we come 1 peg closer to the end because we started 1 peg farther from the other end, and that's okay, but I don't want to include the last 2 pegs ever in the pattern stitch. It makes a nicer edge, I have found. So we'll do this group just as we've been doing them, and then have a look at how it's coming out. And at the end of the row, wrap and knit the remaining 2 stitches. Okay, turn so the light's a little bit better. Where we knitted stitches through stitches, this sort of bar occurs. Here it is, here it is, here it is, here it is. And it's offset, zigzagging up the work, because we keep starting either with this peg or this peg as our first pattern stitch. Now, if you don't offset it, you get stacked up bars across, like these are. And it has a somewhat cabled look. You probably can't see very well in the darker yarn, but I did that for 3 rows to see how it would look. And it's not a bad look. I think it's something we might want to fool around with at some point. But the real Irish mesh stitch does include alternation, so that's what this is. I'd like to point out something else. I'm new to this stitch myself, so I'm not sure if we can rely on it. But simply by leaving a minimum of 2 stitches at each end, not part of the pattern, we're getting an edge that doesn't roll all that much, and it looks pretty good. So if somebody wants to fool around with this and create a scarf based on this design and see if it continues for the length of a scarf to look pretty good, be my guest. I think that might be nice. I certainly can see that if it needed any finishing, something like 1 row of single crochet would make quite a difference in finishing it up. Anyway, here is the Irish mesh stitch for regular peg looms, and I hope you enjoy it.